I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune RESET, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Autoimmune RESET podcast. I'm your host, VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist and expert in autoimmune disease. And today we're diving deep into a topic that impacts so many people with autoimmune conditions and hair loss, and that's low ferritin. And we're going to be discussing many aspects of low ferritin and its role in hair loss as well, because it is a subject that sparks a lot of confusion. And I have clients come to me and they are taking iron supplementation and it isn't helping with their autoimmune condition or helping to stimulate hair growth. It also isn't helping in some cases to lift their iron levels. So we're going to be talking about why that's the case in this episode. We'll be breaking down the symptoms of low ferritin, looking at the problems with high iron, because iron can actually be inflammatory. So if you are taking a lot of iron and your body isn't able to utilize it, that can be a problem as well. The role of inflammation in infections like Blastocystis, and why the real issue might not be iron deficiency, but rather your ability to use iron. So we're going to be exploring all of that, as well as copper's role in this complex issue of ferritin, why anemia of chronic inflammation might be the missing piece of the puzzle, and lots of other elements that relate to ferritin. So I'm not going to bombard you too much, but there is a lot to cover today. And it is a subject that I am passionate about because I think understanding the health of your red blood cells, understanding the type of anemia you have, understanding what your symptoms relate to and whether they are related to low iron is absolutely key in improving your health. And I know for years my iron stores were extremely low, and it wasn't by taking iron supplements that I was able to increase my ferritin levels. It was to do with a lot of other factors, and that's what we are covering today. So ferritin is a protein that stores iron in your body, and when ferritin levels are low, it typically indicates that your body doesn't have enough iron. So I know many people come to me and they have alopecia and they have extremely low ferritin. I know there is advice out there where if your ferritin isn't above 70, then you're never going to get any hair growth. And that isn't an incorrect statement, but the truth is I have worked with clients who have been able to have regrowth and significant regrowth where they have lost, say, 60% of the hair on their head, and then they have been able to have the hair regrowth of all of the patches on their head without raising their ferritin to 70. So that's why I challenge that. But it is important to raise your ferritin levels. And even if you raise it 50% or 100% and you're doing that over, say, 3 to 6 to 9 months, that's going to make a huge difference. But many of us think of iron as simply being about red blood cells, but actually iron plays a much more complex role in the body because it's essential for oxygen transport, energy production, and immune function. And symptoms of low ferritin aren't just hair loss. There are many other symptoms which I'm sure you're familiar with, like fatigue, pale skin, dizziness. There are many other symptoms that you might not think relate to low iron, but they could do. For example, restless leg syndrome and even skin issues. But when ferritin levels drop, it's not just a matter of feeling When ferritin levels drop, it's not just a matter of feeling tired or losing your hair. These symptoms can be quite diverse and disruptive. And besides the fatigue and hair thinning that you might notice, that you could have weakness. I know I used to experience a lot of muscle weakness, shortness of breath with little exertion, which is quite a hard symptom to determine what is causing that, because you can have wheezing if you have histamine. There are many other reasons that you can have shortness of breath, but certainly if you are experiencing that and you're not sure why, then think about these other symptoms as well that could relate to low ferritin, such as pale or brittle nails, headaches, cold hands or feet, and as I said, restless legs. But in autoimmune conditions, low ferritin can sometimes go unnoticed, especially if you aren't getting it tested with your doctors, because the symptoms can overlap with inflammation, it might overlap with your condition, and you may have a lot of different issues going on, and you might not realise that this could relate to low ferritin. When it comes to low ferritin, the first approach that I see many people taking is to start taking iron supplements. So we need to ask ourselves the question, is that the right thing? Because before jumping into supplementation, you need to understand that high iron in the body can also be problematic. And this is why I don't ordinarily recommend iron supplementation. I do occasionally if I think it is really necessary, and if somebody's ferritin levels are very low, and I have considered all these other factors that we will be discussing today. But iron is essential in the body, and when it's low it certainly is a problem, but it's also a pro-oxidant. And one of the issues in autoimmune conditions is oxidative stress, and that's where you have more of these pro-oxidants, so these free radicals that can create damage in the body, and they can exacerbate inflammation as well. So if you have too much iron circulating in your system, it can actually fuel inflammation and oxidative stress and contribute to tissue damage. And this becomes especially relevant if you have an autoimmune condition where inflammation is already high, because, as I said, excess iron may exacerbate that inflammatory process, worsen your symptoms, and actually create a vicious cycle when it comes to your autoimmune disease. One of the first things that I consider when somebody comes to me with low ferritin is whether they have an infection, because infections in your body can actually cause you to have low ferritin and low iron stores. And there is a parasite which is quite common in the body called Blastocystis, and I work with lots of children who have alopecia areata, and when we run a stool test for them, I have seen Blastocystis in the children's guts that I've been working with on too many occasions for it to be a coincidence. And if I was to put a percentage on it, it's probably 70% of the children I'm working with have either a parasite or an overgrowth or Candida, which could be having this effect in the body and causing their ferritin levels to be low. So let's look at the relationship between infections and iron, because it's crucial to understand this when it comes to low iron and infections. Because the reason we need to know this, and the reason this is what I'm thinking when somebody comes to me with low ferritin, is I always like to address the root cause. And if someone comes to me with low ferritin and I just give them iron supplements and don't deal with the root cause, then I could actually cause more harm than good. And that's why I don't generally take that approach. I want to understand, well, why are they low in iron in the first place? It might be obvious. It might be that they are just not consuming enough iron in the diet. But I'll be honest, that's very rarely the case with the clients that I'm working with. And one of the root causes could actually be an infection, because something like Blastocystis, which is a parasite found in the gut, and as I said, I do see it in my clients who have alopecia areata, especially children. I also see it in my clients who have autoimmune disease. But what Blastocystis can do, like other infections, is it can impair the way that your body uses iron. And blastocystis actually feeds off iron in your body, making the infection worse. So as you can see, as well as iron being a pro-oxidant and potentially fueling oxidative stress in your body, it could also be feeding the pathogens in your gut. So you have to be really mindful about that. And as I said, I will recommend iron supplementation to clients who have very low ferritin, but they may have one of these infections as well. So I've got to weigh out the pros and cons when it comes to iron supplementation, because if I'm giving it to a client who I know has a parasite, then it could also be feeding the parasite. And it's not to say that iron supplementation is wrong if you do have a parasite, but you do have to be aware of that and consider it and decide whether you need iron and how urgently you need iron against eradicating the parasite from your gut, which can take 6 to 8 weeks, if not longer. In that time, you could be increasing iron stores in the body and making a big difference, because iron is important for your energy, it is important for your immune system, and it can cause other symptoms that I mentioned, like the fatigue. But pathogens can proliferate as a result of having access to more iron, and that can cause more of an issue in the gut, which can lead to leaky gut syndrome and other problems. And it's not just blastocystis, there are actually lots of other pathogens that thrive on iron. And some of the main ones that I see are Helicobacter pylori, so H. pylori, which is found in the stomach. It's a bacteria that uses iron from the host and uses it to grow. And that's why people with H. pylori infections may have difficulty maintaining healthy iron levels despite supplementation. And that's what I'll see. I'll see somebody who's taken iron supplementation for a very, very long time and their ferritin levels just won't lift. And that's when you've got to start thinking about infections. On top of that, Candida, which is a yeast that's a normal part of the microbiota, but can overgrow under certain conditions, especially when the immune system is compromised, also requires iron for its metabolism and growth. And that means that high iron levels in the body can contribute to Candida overgrowth and exacerbate symptoms like digestive disturbances, brain fog, itchy skin, and it can just lead to a more chronic infection. And Candida is another infection that I see coming up time and time again in my clients. And again, it's for me to work out, is this an opportunist infection, so it's there because there's lots of other imbalances in the body, or is it the root cause? And if I determine that it's at the root cause, and I know that we need to go through an anti-Candida protocol to really help bring down Candida in the body, and that should help lift the iron stores as well. So when you're taking iron supplements, when you're dealing with an infection like these, you could actually unintentionally be making things worse by feeding the very pathogens that are contributing to your symptoms. But now, here's the crucial point. The real problem with iron is not necessarily deficiency, but it's whether your body can actually use the iron, because even if your ferritin is low, that doesn't automatically mean that you need to take iron supplements. And this is where copper comes into it, because copper is a vital cofactor that helps your body utilize iron. And without enough copper, even if you're getting enough iron, you can't properly absorb and utilize it. So if you're low on copper, iron supplementation might not help, and it could even lead to an imbalance. So it's crucial to ensure that you know both your copper levels and iron levels. And one of the tests that I will run is to screen for minerals and metals in my client's body to determine whether their ferritin levels are low because they don't have the vital cofactors to help to utilize iron. And with hair loss as well, there is something called L-lysine. And L-lysine is really important for hair growth. It's there to support the hair follicle, but it is also important for iron utilization. So if you are low on lysine, then you may also have an issue utilizing and using iron in the body. For many people with autoimmune diseases, the real culprit isn't low iron. It's a condition called anemia of chronic inflammation. And this is a type of anemia that is driven by the body's inflammatory response. And in anemia of chronic inflammation, iron gets trapped in storage sites and it makes it unavailable for red blood cell production, even though there's plenty of iron circulating. And the key to understanding anemia of chronic inflammation is that it doesn't respond well to traditional iron supplements, because the problem isn't actually lack of iron, it's your body's ability to be able to use the iron in an inflammatory environment. So if you're dealing with chronic inflammation, then iron supplementation might not resolve the issue. Instead, treating the underlying inflammation is far more important. And last year, I created my signature program, the Inflammation Reset, which is all about lowering inflammation in the body. Because when you have inflammation, it has a knock-on effect to so many other systems in the body. Not only can it initiate and trigger an autoimmune response in the body. So for somebody who may have autoantibodies and they don't have any autoimmune symptoms, if they then become inflamed, it can switch on autoimmunity in their body. So keeping inflammation down in the body can be extremely helpful for somebody who has a susceptibility to autoimmune disease. But also when it comes to low ferritin levels, or when it comes to hormonal imbalances and other factors in the body, it affects the way that your body would ordinarily work if the inflammation wasn't there. And that is why bringing down inflammation can have such a knock-on effect. And I know that somebody asked me recently, what was that point in your own health journey where you look back and you think, wow, there was some, really meaningful changes in my health. And it was going through an antiviral protocol. And I think by going through that antiviral protocol, by bringing down the amount of viruses that were latent in my cells and in my body, and bringing down the inflammation that was being stimulated because of that, I noticed that my energy improved hugely, and it just made such a big difference. I truly believe that bringing down inflammation can have such a knock-on effect. And we know that it makes a difference with anemia of chronic inflammation as well. So that is just one thing to consider, especially if you have been trying to increase your ferritin levels with iron supplementation alone. So how do you know if you're dealing with low ferritin, iron utilisation problems, or anemia of chronic inflammation? Well, I love my testing, and there are various tests that you can do to determine this. First, getting your ferritin levels checked can at least give you an indication of whether low ferritin is a factor in your symptoms. Low ferritin indicates a lack of stored iron, but it's not enough to diagnose an iron deficiency. You then have serum iron, and that measures the iron in your blood, but again, it's not a reliable indicator on its own. You also have total iron binding capacity, which is often referred to as TIBC. And this test helps you determine whether your body is able to transport iron properly. And that's a major factor in lots of nutrients, including vitamin D and our hormones. It's how well our body is able to transport those hormones and transport those nutrients around our body. And it's the same for cholesterol as well. And if we're not able to transport nutrients around the body, then that can be an issue as well. So that is one thing to look out for. There's also transferrin saturation. This can indicate how much of the iron in your blood is actually available for use. And that's the other thing we always need to consider. We may have hormones in our blood, but if they are bound to a specific compound, it means that we're not able to use them. And that's the same for iron as well. And it's no help to us if it's bound to something. So again, if you have a very high transferrin saturation, then there may be, things to consider around iron utilization. You can also look into your copper levels, as I mentioned, as that's crucial in determining if copper deficiency is contributing to your inability to utilize iron. And then if inflammation is at the heart of your low ferritin, then you can also test inflammatory markers like CRP and ESR. And if they're elevated, it could indicate that you're dealing with anemia of chronic inflammation, and that would require a different approach. Now, I can't not mention the issue with ferritin when it comes to using it as a marker for iron stores, because what I see a lot in my clinic, and that's because I'm working with clients who are inflamed when they first come to me, is that their ferritin levels are actually very high. But that's because high ferritin is actually a marker for inflammation. Ferritin is an acute phase reactant, which means that it increases in response to inflammation in the body, especially when you have an acute illness and your body is defending you from an infection that you might be fighting off. And it can also be linked to autoimmune diseases as well, where inflammation is chronically elevated. So ferritin levels may appear high even when there's no excess iron in the body. A little bit different to the anemia of chronic inflammation. So it's quite a minefield when it comes to ferritin, and there are lots of different aspects to consider, and I'm sure there's going to be more research around it. But inflammation can cause low ferritin, but it can also cause high ferritin. And inflammation can cause ferritin to rise in the body as part of your body's immune response. And this can mask an underlying iron deficiency, which is why it's good to test those other markers as well, because when inflammation is present in your body, it can actually trap iron in storage sites like the liver, making it unavailable for use in the blood, despite what ferritin levels might indicate. And this is why inflammation control becomes crucial, not just for managing autoimmune symptoms, but for ensuring that your body can regulate and use iron. I think when it comes to iron, the link with inflammation is absolutely vital if you have a chronic illness, or you have chronic fatigue, or you have autoimmune disease, and bringing down inflammation in the body can make such a big difference. So what can you do about it? Well, if you're dealing with low ferritin and you believe it's an underlying factor in your hair loss or in an autoimmune condition, and you suspect iron utilization issues, the first step is to have a full blood count type test, which is going to give you a good assessment of those markers that I discussed. You can get that done with your doctor. I also offer private testing, but you can usually get those markers done by your doctor. You can also look at your copper levels, and if copper deficiency is a concern, then you can make sure that you're getting enough copper in your diet through foods like shellfish, liver, seeds and nuts. And I do see copper lacking quite often, I suppose because it is through these foods that you might not be eating as often, like shellfish and liver. And if inflammation is the issue, then you can focus on some anti-inflammatory strategies. I've covered this many times in the podcast. I also cover it in my group program, the Inflammation Reset, and I'll put the link to that in the show notes if you'd like to learn more about that. But iron supplementation might still be necessary in some cases, but it's essential to take a holistic approach that addresses all the factors involved. So I hope today I've given you some insight into the role of ferritin in many different health conditions, but especially hair loss, and what low ferritin could mean for you, because it's going to be different for everyone. If you know that your diet is low in iron, then it might just be as simple as that. But if not, it is worth considering these other factors and not just going straight for iron supplementation when your ferritin levels are low. But also knowing that although ferritin is a key component in hair growth, and iron is a key component in hair growth, it's not the only thing. And I have seen success with clients who, yes, have increased their ferritin levels, but they haven't increased them above 70, because that can take time. It took time for me, and it's still something that I'm managing on a daily basis. I don't take iron supplementation, but I just make sure I'm eating iron-rich foods because I know specifically for me, my body needs that. And I'm also thinking about those cofactors like copper and lysine and B vitamins and other things that I need to make sure that I'm including in my diet to help with iron utilization. If you have any questions about this, then feel free to pop over to my Instagram account, which is at the Autoimmune Nutritionist. And you can also join my free group, the Autoimmune Forum, where we have a community of individuals who are living with autoimmune conditions and chronic illness, and we are finding ways to thrive in life through diet and experiences and lifestyle changes. And next week, starting the 13th of January 2025, you can join us anytime, but I am going to be going through The Artist's Way, which is a book by Julia Cameron, and it is a 3-month process to unlock your inner creativity, because as much as restoring your health and healing after an autoimmune disease diagnosis does require you to eat healthy, nutrient-dense foods, and nutrition plays a key role, so does your emotional health. And going through this process of The Artist's Way can make such a big difference in how you feel about yourself. You may learn a lot about yourself, and you're going to unlock creativity, which can bring a lot of joy. I read this book many years ago and went through the process, and it made such a difference to me. And there are so many incredible reviews from people in all walks of life. So if you would like to spend 3 months with me going through this book, then you can pop over to the Autoimmune Forum and join the events page, because there are weekly tasks that you do, there are morning pages, there's an artist day, so we'll be going through all that together. I am doing it too. You can keep doing this throughout your life, and it's good. I haven't done it for a while, and I'd just like to start it again. It's the beginning of the year, why not? And I love doing it with a community of people who I know we've all been through the same challenges, and I just want the best for everyone, and I know this made a big difference for me too. So I hope to see you over there. If not, have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time, and remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.